Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Welcome back. I'm your host, G.I. Wingnut. We're working on this book, How Trump Rescued Scientology and the Deep State. Welcome to Part 5. The remaining Dianetics are being hanged, and this hostility is evident not only in theory, but also in practice. My wife and I were the most successful independent Dianetics auditors of the Church of Scientology in Germany for 12 years until 1999. Although well over 200 of our Dianetics clients became members of the Church of Scientology because of their enthusiasm and achievements, we were fought to the death and finally expelled from the church in 1999. I'll have to get to that another time. But there's a YouTube channel, I think it's called German News, and they have a lot of information about that time period, and specifically Scientology in Germany. Moving on. But this was not an isolated case. For example, Mike P., a salaried executive in the Hamburg Church of Scientology, had brought his Dianetics department to an unparalleled level of expansion in 1990. Newbies there learned to apply Dianetics to each other and had a lot of fun and success. So, masses of new members were recruited and a lot of revenue flowed into the Church of Scientology's treasury. But for flimsy reasons, Mike P. was dismissed and the successful Dianetics department closed for good. Since no attempt was made to build on Mike's success, proves that the accusations against him were false. In fact, the incident demonstrates the Scientology management's hostility to Dianetics and the improvements it brings. Ask any ex-Scientologist, they'll tell you there are no improvements. It's all about hypnosis. Moving on. Narconon is brought down. Now, I did post a link in my community tab, and what I'll end up doing probably is go and read out a couple of articles about Narconon and some of the other Scientology front groups. I've done some of that already. I do believe that, I forget which episode it is, but in my 1952 and a Planned Deception series, there's an episode on Scientology. Anyway, Narconon is brought down. Narconon's success story also had to be broken to stop the demand of Dianetics. The new management of the Church of Scientology first brought Narconon under its control by means of copyrights and trademarks, brought out new course materials, and finally banned them from using Dianetics for drug rehabilitation. I refer you again to the LRH quote above, according to which there can be no monopoly and no license obligations for Dianetics. Since then, Narconon's success rate has dropped to the usual low level of other institutions, losing recognition, financial support, and ultimately its locations and facilities in one country after another. The author continues to say, the history of Narconon is exemplary for us, both for the success of scientific Dianetics, which has also been verified by law enforcement agencies in precise statistics and therefore received such rapid recognition, as well as for the criminal suppression of Dianetics. There have been law enforcement agencies that have raided Scientology buildings. In Spain, Scientology has been deemed not socially beneficial and has warned against them. I think may have taken their charity status as well, and the National Health Service in England has shown that Narconon does not provide any social benefit. So, I got to move on. There's so much here, but I got to move on. Let's see. Continues to say, with Dianetics, you can become drug-free, which includes alcohol addiction, and also really healthy and happy. L. Ron Hubbard was a drug-addled creep. Moving on. Dianetics becomes cheese in the mousetrap. In summary, I can only warn against falling into the mousetrap of the Church of Scientology, which attracts new people from the public by means of Dianetics advertising in order to afterward dissuade them from its correct application. You're not doing it right. Good dude sounds like an apologist. Anyway. Dianetics is the cheese, and the cheese is as real as Swiss Appenzeller. Otherwise, you couldn't catch mice with it. The evil about the mousetrap is not that the cheese is of poor quality, but that it aims to catch the mouse, and certainly not to fill its hunger. And that's how it is in Scientology. Dianetics is only available for a few hours at best to impress and to feed the newcomer with the fascinating insight into the essence of our real existence. Afterwards, it's denied under flimsy pretenses. Completing Dianetics is almost impossible within the church, so this guy says. I can't speak to that authoritatively, so let's move right along. How does the empire create a state religion? Oh, that's a really good question, especially with this turn of events in 2024 in the United States. Jesus Christ of Nazareth undoubtedly shook the foreign rule of his time. Not only was he crucified for this, pardon me, but the perceptions of Christians in the Roman Empire over the following centuries shows the efforts they went to bring it, let me try that sentence again. Not only was he crucified for this, but the persecutions of Christians in the Roman Empire over the following centuries shows the efforts they went to bring it under control. 300 years later, Emperor Constantine succeeded in transforming Christianity into the state religion. To purge unwanted teachings, the Episcopal Conference elected a pope who resided in Rome under the control of the emperor, who ruled over Christianity through his Vatican state, his curia. Only once these conditions were in place that the state ceased its persecutions. Thus, early Christians lost their identity in democratic self-governance, and had it replaced with a state religion. There were three government-appointed hierarchical levels of the Christian elected: bishops, cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. And it was these cardinals who were entitled to appoint a pope. Thus, the empire of the time was able to take control of the Vatican state and the Christians by creating a pyramid power structure. Pardon me again. That really sounds like a lot of that Christian identity doctrine, the way it preaches against the Catholics. And what's really interesting is that I won't get into that right now. There is a connection between Scientology and the Mormons and the Catholics, and therefore also between Scientology and the Catholics via the Mormons because of the connections. Anyway, that's another time. Allergies are kicking up, sorry. RTC controls Scientology for the deep state. That's the Religious Technical Center. I think I misspoke myself in the last episode. A similar structure was put in place in the 1980s when the United States brought Scientology under its control. It overturned the highest level of Scientology, the international management, by simply putting 3 levels above it: the Watchdog Committee, the Commodore's Messenger Organization, CMO International, and above that, the RTC. RTC stands for Religious Technology Center, a control body established by the deep state in the 1980s above international church management. The appointment chairman of the RTC board was Mr. David Miscavige, a small, unknown Scientology employee with minimal auditor training, or management training, not enough to qualify for a low management position, let alone the leading position of a worldwide religion. But he can scream well and, if necessarily, violently assert himself. There are lots of reports that validate, that verify, that fact check that as true. Moving on. And that's why the law firms, which pretended to be commissioned by LRH, placed him as their puppet in the visible position of power, because as non-Scientologists, they couldn't possibly issue orders and instructions directly to Scientologists. Okay, this is an interesting take, but as I understand, David Miscavige was actually L. Ron Hubbard's personal assistant. I could be wrong, but if I remember right, that's what Doug Kramer and Aaron Smith Levin both said. I do believe. I could be wrong. Moving along. David Miscavige was exposed as a CIA agent by a former CIA director shortly before his death. Not only does Miscavige have the reputation of a notorious thug, he also selfishly removes anyone who stands in the way of his power. Sounds like the aspirations of somebody else I've been hearing about in the media a lot lately. Moving on. This has been published by affidavits of many affected people. Many disappointed Scientologists dedicated themselves to the task of exposing Miscavige as a sociopath. But that alone is of no use, because the CST is still above RTC, and they would fill the post with another lackey if Miscavige was or has deposed. CTS is the Church of Spiritual Technology, the intermediary to the deep state, led by a declared enemy of Scientology, the former deputy director of the U.S. Department, Mead Emery, tax lawyer, who doesn't even pretend to be a Scientologist, but claims to exercise ultimate control over the copyrights and writings, and thus over the replacement of the RTC post. Should Miscavige actually be dismissed? All right, so it's important to point out at this juncture about this spite against the IRS, this former deputy director of the U.S. Treasury Department, this tax lawyer. L. Ron Hubbard despised that stuff. That's why the Xenu origin story, as accurately depicted in the South Park episode, called in these people that were overpopulating his universe to audit them, and his government audits. They froze them in blocks of alcohol and glycol, and anyway, go check out the South Park episode. It's perfect. Moving along. This level above RTC was secretly established as a safety gap and was only discovered decades later. An interface between the visible hierarchical levels of Scientology and the deep state. Essentially staffed by attorneys and tax lawyers with successful careers at the American Tax Office. Again, I'm hearing a lot of parallels to a lot of rhetoric that I've actually helped promote in the past, which I don't anymore, thus MAGA apostate. Yeah, this is wild. The parallels between this book and the rumors over there in QAnon. Anyway, this RTC CST controlled Church of Scientology no longer frees people today, but fascinates freethinkers with convincing LRH writings, captures them, and then brings them under control step by step. That's what it did from the get-go. Anyway, so Scientology, just like other major religious movements, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, has become a state religion to make itself a useful partner to the deep state and big businesses. Quote, make them poor, I'll keep them stupid, end quote. I don't know where that comes from, but, that might be a reference to the whole Henry Ford production line thing, public education. Anyway, good grief. Oh my goodness. So, how to free Scientology from these manipulations. In contrast to the aforementioned religious movements, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, whose original writings are no longer generally acceptable, if they still exist anywhere, whatever is stored in the secret library in the deep catacombs of the Vatican State. Oh my goodness, there's that Vatican Library conspiracy again. Oh, anyway. Let me try that sentence again. I need full context. In contrast to the aforementioned religious movements, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, whose original writings are no longer generally accessible, if they still exist anywhere, whatever is stored in the secret library in the deep catacombs of the Vatican State, 99% of the originals of LRH are still available today and are almost completely digitized and accessible almost free of charge. Almost free of charge. Our file collection of LRH books, lectures, bulletins, policy letters, essays, and even audio and video files numbered in 6 digits on a terabyte disk drive. The dividing line between originals and forgeries is at June 1972, when L. Ron Hubbard lost his influence on the publication of the writings. But there are backdated forgeries also. What happened to LRH after 1972? Whatever happened to LRH later is still unclear, and will probably only be uncovered after the ongoing cleansing of the current U.S. corrupt agencies. Oh my goodness, what is Elon Musk trying to do? Until then, one can only have theories about Ron's fate based on the limited available facts. Presumably, Hubbard was arrested and was able to write some more years in captivity. In the mid-1970s, he wrote 2 novels, Mission Earth and War for Earth, which suggests the greater game between good and evil and the influence of extraterrestrials on our globe. Oh my goodness, there's the lizard people reference. Holy cow. All right, moving along. The publications of these 2 works are suppressed for 10 years until the 1980s to give the impression that LRH is still around. This was to suppress the growing doubts, since he had not been seen nor heard, and there were no new books for many years. The Detective Time Machine of RTC. RTC claims that these books were written in the 1980s, but the content shows that the novels deal exclusively with topics, techniques, and cultural assets from the early 1970s. Not even the personal computer made it into the novels. Only rattling teleprinter terminals on the mainframes as they were used at NASA in the 1960s. No author writes such a thing in the 1980s in the drawing era of personal computing. Grand comeback of the advocates. In 1977, some law firms presented themselves as principals of the Scientology movement, pretending to be commissioned by LRH to represent his business rights as an author to the church and to administer his will and inheritance. Oh my goodness, so much paranoia. Hubbard had disappeared, presumably, replaced by a similar looking doppelganger, fake LRH. Fake Joe Biden. Rumors, crazy stuff. Who backed this new management by occasionally appearing to individual Scientologists, but never in public, shunning the light of the public like the devil shunned holy water. Oh my goodness. Instead, he was represented by non-Scientologist lawyers, a professional group that Ron, quote, got to know and love, end quote, decades prior in the 1950s. LRH scriptures in the public domain. In order to obtain the intellectual property that LRH had given to Scientologists through the HASI in 1958, the organization was liquidated in 1978. It was hoped that Scientologists would not notice nor oppose the fact that the fake LRH with his lawyers could finally transfer Ron's legacy to the CST as his rightful heir. In truth, however, the original LRH writings were transferred into public domain at the latest with the death of Hashi in 1978. Thus, white Scientology is free and can be used by anyone who sees through the game of forgeries and deceptions. Do your own research. That's what Q says, right? Scientology only for wealthy and beautiful. In order to stop the expansion of Scientology, service prices were raised considerably following 1977, so that only the wealthy, such as Hollywood stars, could afford this, quote, immediate enlightenment, including VAT, end quote. I believe that's value added tax. Prior to this, the complete route from newbie to OT, the bridge, cost only a 4-digit amount, and that could be afforded by anybody. Today, it is a 6 to 7-digit figure, freedom only for the prosperous. Can you say prosperity gospel? Moving on. Control of all Scientologists, even after 1982. To bring the Scientology movement into a downward trend, it was weakened in the traditional proven manner, divide and rule. The strike was effective and its effects long-lasting. To this end, thousands of active Scientologists were unceremoniously excommunicated by Miscavige and his advocates in 1982 to break the emerging resistance against the all too obvious exploitation and coercion of the new management. The Scientology term for this expulsion is a suppressive person declare. According to LRH, this SP declare may only be made after a just internal church legal proceeding, including appropriate defense, to ensure that it only affects sociopaths and not people who stand in the way of a coup and take over the organization by the organization by a new management of the deep state. See, Elron was pretty dadgum paranoid, you know. I bet what we got going on here with this SP declare. If you're declared a suppressive person, anybody who's in Scientology has to disconnect. They have to shun you. They cannot have any communication. But one of the things that happened with some of these people that left Scientology on their own, that left the main church of Scientology, became independent Scientologists and practiced on their own. These are the ones that L. Ron Hubbard referred to as squirrels, because they squirreled away. They stole the technology. That's how we got the Church of the Final Process. That's Dave's Been Not Confused has a great episode on that. So, moving right along. The Free Zone since 1983. Subsequently, in protest against this injustice, tens of thousands of Scientologists left the organization and joined the Cast Outs to continue practicing Scientology outside the church. The so-called Free Zone was created around 1983 with David Mayo and Bill Robertson as leaders. However, about half of Scientologists remained in the church, waiting for better times, while the mood continued to drop, with more and more legal action against members. Services including price and providing less and less results. So let me go back to that. More and more legal action against members. There's still an ongoing continued case of labor trafficking and another one of trafficking of minors against David Miscavige and a whole bunch of other people at the top of the Church of Scientology, as well as the Church of Scientology itself. So, moving right along, how the, quote, free and independent, end quote, were deceived. Unfortunately, however, those in the free zone did not understand how the game divide et impera is played, because if you as an elite, as a ruling class, already have control over the whole thing, then of course you don't abnegate your control. You don't abnegate your control over or give over your control to over the half of Scientology to rule over the official half. Of course, you stage the split in such a way that you can still control both parts afterwards. And so it has in this case. You can only admire the deep state for its genius and tricks. If you listen to Roger Stone, which I'm not a fan of his, but if you listen to Roger Stone, the deep state is just another word for the military-industrial complex, as described by the late President Dwight David Eisenhower. Good grief. I need to get back to that on that 1952 project. All right, so back to the book. LRH published a paper about the third-party law. It states that when two people argue and cannot resolve their differences, unknown to them, there is a third party creating the situation and profiting from it. The third party in the dispute between churches, or churchies, as the members of the Church of Scientology are affectionately called, and free zoners are, of course, the agents of the deep state who have taken over control. Controlled opposition narrative. Gotcha. Moving on. Of course, they don't have to supply every small splinter group of the free zone with an agent as long as these free zoners are within the scope of the standard tech. They are under control, practicing the version of Scientology that was progressively altered after 1972. With this ineffective substitution, they can no longer make clears and OTs, and they don't threaten the deep state with remote viewing. And even if one rejects all the changes after the 1980s, because the takeover changes of that period became obvious, one has already swallowed the essential changes that were made in the 1970s and is trapped. The LRH marionette is burned in 1986. January 22nd, 1986 is the official day of L. Ron Hubbard's death, the day he ceased to be used as a talking doll to justify all the massive changes. The body could not be shown to anyone because it did not even look like Hubbard. It was presumably a recently deceased psychiatric inmate or homeless person without relatives, whose body no one would miss. Oh, wow. Wow. Copium, big time copium. Moving on. In fact, The coroner attested to various needle puncture wounds in the buttocks, and the psychiatric drug Vistaril was found in the blood. The body was identified on the basis of fingerprints for which the requested FBI database stated L. Ron Hubbard was the owner. Not a difficult magic trick, since the whole thing was staged by the deep state, for whom the FBI database or the facts to cover the coroner can easily be manipulated. All of the evidence didn't add up for the coroner. He wanted to order an autopsy, but the LRH attorneys averted this by conjuring an LRH will, which forbade any autopsies or further investigation for religious reasons, and had demanded immediate cremation. Of course, there was no obvious religious reverence among Scientologists, who simply leave a dead body to go their own way. Let me interject there. So, what they think is that they are a thetan, that they are a spirit that is just driving a shell around. And so, when it's time for you to move on to the next part of your mission, you just drop this body and move on. So, all right, back to the book. The medical examiner was intimidated, not wanting to risk legal disputes, and eventually cooperated with the lawyers. Even the evidence photos of the body he took were destroyed at the lawyer's request before a relative could look at them. The body of LRH was cremated within 24 hours before Ron's family or friends could identify it. LRH continues to happily revise his writings even after his death. Although the fake LRH puppet game had now played out, one would think that Scientology scripture revisions would come to an end. Yet this activity continued cheerfully and shamelessly in the name of LRH or at least for another 5 years. And this in spite of the fact that counterfeiting LRH writings is regarded as one of the biggest crimes in Scientology. Yeah, they call it treason. Moving on. This fact alone proves that no consent by LRH was ever needed for the countless revisions that started in 1972. The new management is completely unscrupulous at a counterfeiting workshop. Boy, howdy, that sounds mighty familiar. I've been hearing some of that stuff over there in that conspiracy theory community I used to hang out in. Moving on. As long as the group trauma of Scientology, the Great Schism of 82-83, is not cleared up, Scientologists as a group will remain in a state of shock and not dare to rebel for fear of reprisal. Since then, it has been known that any questioning of new management is to be punished with immediate exclusion, along with a refusal of the bridge and the prospect of a better life. Ooh, excommunicated, shunned, and doomed to hell of some sort. Anyway, moving on. This is not dissimilar to excommunication by the Catholic Church, with promises of certain hell for the apostate. To deal with the situations like this, LRH developed group Dianetics processes which could resolve group trauma, but everyone must begin to overcome their fear of punishment first and study all the evidence presented until the full truth comes to light. This booklet can facilitate that. Readers are encouraged to pass it on. Oh, wow. Yeah, go do your own research. All right, so let me go ahead and call it here, and I'll get this one last episode managed. And we'll have this book finished up. Thanks for hanging out, folks, and take care of yourself. Mental health matters.